Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. Today is your FIPA Access and Privacy News Summary for Saturday, June 22nd, 2024. We'll be bringing you all the Canadian national, provincial, and international stories that hit our radar. Coming up, hot off the press, we have a court case highlighting political parties misusing your personal information. We'll hear from FIPA President Mike Larsen about the latest examples showing how political parties keep and use secret files on you. As the election season heats up south of the border, we see several troubling stories that intersect LGBTQ, gender and reproductive rights, along with data breaches and misuse of personal information. And we see local news outlets highlighting the access of information and privacy issues impacting Canadians where they live. Mike will join us again to talk about the importance of the Local Journalism Initiative. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and here's the stories that impacted the information field this week. Starting with national news, today we're starting with your political privacy and the action of federal political parties. Voters in Toronto, St. Paul, will be picking a new representative on June 24th. The Conservatives are trying to take advantage of that opening. They have recently sent a letter to Jewish households detailing what they call Trudeau's silence about a rise in so-called Jew hatred. Joining me now is FIPA President Mike Larsen. Mike, what is your take on this story?
Thanks, Patrick. Unfortunately, this is not the first time this sort of thing's happened. You can think back to a 2009 CBC story that detailed how the government of the day had sent a letter to Jewish voters attempting to label the opposition as anti-Semitic. And this sort of thing substantiates the types of ways that political parties routinely get information from electoral authorities. They add information to it from a variety of sources and then treat people differently based on that kind of compilation of information they have about potential voters. The information that they've purchased and add to your file, how they manage that information, how they protect it, it's all kind of a black box. It's largely unknown. So what do we know? We know that the political parties in Canada, collectively spend millions of donor dollars to manage and append information to your voter file. On top of that, they're collectively willing to spend millions of dollars, and tax dollars included, in courts to exempt themselves from privacy laws. They fought this tooth and nail. They all say they want privacy law to apply to public and private bodies to better protect people's personal information. They just don't want the law to apply to them. The idea is that political parties are some kind of separate special entity that should be exempt from this. They're more interested in going to court to protect their interests rather than our interests in terms of our personal information. So we'll be considering at FIPA our own next steps to ensure British Columbians and Canadians are aware of the actions, risks, and potential harm from political parties with personal information. We're going to keep monitoring this as the federal political parties appeal to the BC Supreme Court's recent decision. We'll be sure to bring more to your listeners in the weeks and months ahead.
Jumping to the relationship between Ottawa and other provinces, we see leaders starting to take notice and raise concerns about the prospect of foreign interference at the provincial level. BC Premier David Eby has sent a letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He calls on the federal government to address concerns raised in the public inquiry into foreign interference regarding federal electoral processes and democratic institutions. Eby claims BC does not have the information it needs to intercept and address foreign interference that may be occurring in the province. He claims he's unable to address this without federal intervention. The story provides an important reminder about the potential impacts of foreign interference in the electoral process. As the story has expanded in recent weeks, it has shifted to highlight that the electoral processes begin with political parties. These parties are asked to explain how they prevent foreign interference in their individual candidate selection and nomination processes. It is ultimately these processes that form the foundation of how people are on the ballot. We have a lot of news coming from south of the border this week. In Florida, one politician with access to personal health information decided to use it to promote his virtues. State Governor Ron DeSantis accessed the personal information of medical marijuana patients to boast about his signing of the state budget. He also praised cancer research done by his wife, Cassie DeSantis. Nothing in the email mentions medical marijuana, and people are feeling their privacy has been violated. Florida has broad public record laws, and if someone obtained the master email list, they could deduce who is a medical marijuana patient, since they make up about 35% of the recipients. Ironically, DeSantis has been a loud critic of big tech and has accused private companies of misusing users' personal information. Shifting to Vermont, a Republican governor has vetoed a data privacy bill brought forward by House Democrats. The law would have allowed people to file civil lawsuits against companies that break certain privacy rules. According to the nonprofit Electronic Privacy Information Center based in Washington, D.C., the legislation would have prohibited the sale of sensitive personal data such as Social Security and driver's license numbers, financial information, and health data. It also would have set meaningful limits on the amount of personal data that companies can collect and use. Continuing the federal saga of TikTok in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has referred a complaint against TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance, to the Department of Justice. The agency said that while it does not typically publicize complaints that are referred to the DOJ, it determined doing so this time was in the public interest. Citing national security concerns, U.S. lawmakers passed a law in April that requires TikTok to be sold to an approved buyer or face a nationwide ban. TikTok and Beijing-based ByteDance have sued to overturn the law, which President Joe Biden signed. And as a reminder, you can always read more on this and all the stories highlighted in this roundup by visiting the FIPA website or by following the links in the show notes below. In continuing our coverage of news from south of the border, we turn to the concerning impacts in polarization and personal information. In a Texas data breach, a doctor calling himself a whistleblower illegally obtained private information on transgender patients from the nation's largest pediatric hospital who are not under his care. Federal prosecutors said Dr. Ethan Haim snatched the information and shared it with a conservative activist with what they describe as an intent to describe malicious harm to Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. Haim pleaded not guilty Monday in federal court to 4 counts of wrongfully obtaining individually identifiable health information. Texas lawmakers banned transgender care for minors in September 2023. That law is being challenged in court. At least 25 states have adopted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors, and most of those states face lawsuits. Conservative attacks on women's rights to choose remain front and center. Anti-abortion groups and their Republican allies in state governments are using an array of strategies to counter proposed ballot initiatives. It includes abortion opponents launching misinformation campaigns aimed at thwarting the abortion rights campaign's signature-collecting efforts. In at least one instance, voters were sent texts falsely accusing petitioners of trying to steal people's personal data rather than exercise their democratic rights. And now turning to international news outside of North America, Myanmar is cracking down on the free flow of information by shutting off access to virtual private networks, or VPNs, which can be used to circumvent blockages of banned websites and services. The military government that took power February 2021, after ousting the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi, had made several previous fitful attempts to throttle internet traffic, especially in the months immediately after their takeover. Reports in local media say the attack on internet usage includes random street searches of people's mobile phones to check for VPN applications, with a fine if they are found, though it is unclear if payments are an official measure. Stories regularly land on our radar from local outlets across Canada that are part of the Local Journalism Initiative. These local outlets play a vital role in helping to highlight the access and privacy stories that impact people where they live. Joining me again is FIPA President Mike Larsen. Mike, what is your take on the importance of local news outlets and the Local Journalism Initiative to access and privacy in Canada?
I've been really impressed with some of the stories about transparency, accountability, and privacy that have come out of the Local Journalism Initiative. And so I think it's very important. And I'm actually reminded when thinking about this of what the Supreme Court of Canada has said about access to information in general, which is that it's intended to facilitate democracy. That's why it's so important. The right to know when it works permits people to make informed decisions and to participate in democratic processes. But this only really works if, first, people are able to use freedom of information and access to information mechanisms, and then second, the general public is able to access the results of this work, right? And this is one of the functions of good journalism is to present this to public and contextualize it and to do the work. But this is, of course, at a time when many journalistic outfits, legacy media outfits, are in trouble, are going through cuts, or are going through consolidation and kind of corporate consolidation. And this makes things very difficult. We have to remember that work using freedom of information mechanisms requires an investment in planning, it requires patience, it requires resources. And so when you start to see, media organizations eroding in many ways, then these things become less and less possible to do, which is where I think a major investment in local journalism comes in. The Local Journalism Initiative and other investments in local media allows trained people, local journalists, to use the mechanisms that we have in terms of FOI and access to information to work stories that deal with the public bodies that are closest to us in our everyday lives. Right? We can go to some of the major media outlets for ATI FOI stories that deal with major aspects of federal government policy, for example. We see good examples of that, but it's the stuff that's closest to us, really, that impacts us most on a day-to-day basis, and you need people who are able to do that work on a sustained basis. And so for that reason, I think the Local Journalism Initiative is particularly important, and the proof is in some of the really good work that we're seeing come out of it.
Brought to us through the LJI, or the Local Journalism Initiative, TBNewsWatch.com looks at the importance of education to prevent elder abuse. It provides a reminder that elder abuse includes misuse of personal information, as we've been seeing an increasing amount of cybercrime targeting seniors. These types of articles provide an important method to increase awareness. David Moskal is co-chair of the Elder Abuse Committee with Age Friendly Thunder Bay. He wants elders to ensure they have someone they can trust and turn to ask questions when approached to give money or personal information. LJI coverage through the Kingstoness is covering the local impacts of cyber attacks in Napanee. On the morning of Thursday, January 11th of this year, town staff reported an inability to access systems and files and, according to the report, quote, recognize an external encryption of files and a posted random note, end quote. In other words, the threat actor was demanding a ransom to give back the information they had encrypted. According to the report, no further actions or breaches have been discovered to date. The town's cybersecurity response team began the negotiation protocols, as they are called, with the threat actors to determine what has been compromised, potential threats, and harms done. And our final LJI story this week from Shootin' the Breeze serving Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest Pass, and area. We see continuing coverage of the $66 million Canadian Energy Centre and calls for better transparency and accountability. Originally created to combat perceived misinformation about the Alberta oil and gas industry, Premier Smith has reintegrated its mandate into the Intergovernmental Relations Department. To the NDP, this shutdown is not a clever workaround for upcoming federal legislation, but rather an indication of the project's failure. NDP leadership candidate and previous energy and climate critic Kathleen Ganley described the CEC as a political vehicle for the UCP and a $30 million slush fund. According to Ganley, quote, we live in an age where probably our biggest crisis is disinformation. And in that age, the War Room, which is exempt from freedom of information provisions, not only attacked journalists, but impersonated them. It pretends to be the media, which is highly problematic in a number of ways. End quote. As always, you can read more on our website and find the full story when you click the links in the show notes below. This has been the FIPA Access and Privacy News. As always, a big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and outlets that make this podcast possible. The music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Our writer is Shaun Fisk. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. If you find this useful and want to support these efforts, be sure to subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Be sure to check back next week for our take on the stories in the information field that impact you.